I think we're all starting to arrive, which is great. Brilliant. I think we're all here. So great that you can all join us. We've got some fantastic guests for this session, who I'm just going to quickly introduce. We've got Annette Bramlett, who's the Director of the Innate Research Partnership of the North's leading research-intensive universities. We've got Andy Koss from Semb Corp, a founder board member of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, as well as being responsible for one of Britain's leading businesses in this space, in particular, of course, with their major presence on Teesside, where it looks like Andy might be today, in fact, from the look of his backdrop.
I am indeed.
I'm guessing that safety signage isn't standard issue in Andy's own home office environment. And finally, we're joined by Andy Storer, who leads the nuclear AMRC, has done fantastic work supporting the UK supply chain in the nuclear industry and in helping to bring about developments in fusion with the arrival of the UKEA in Sheffield, but in many other fields as well. I'm going to talk about some of those later. So, Annette, can I start with you just in dialogue before we open up to the wider audience to get some other questions in? I'm really keen to kind of delve into Net Zero North, which is a project, an initiative that we've been hugely supportive of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Really just to understand a bit more about it and why a group of universities are so interested in skills and also so interested in innovation diffusion and on things that are perhaps not as closely related to pure research as people might assume that research-intensive universities will be focused on.
Thanks, Henri. Yeah, we're really excited about Net Zero North. It's a project where we're working in collaboration with universities across the region, both research-intensive and other universities in the region. We're also working with further education, businesses and public sector. And why it's so important is that we want to use the green economy to drive economic growth and levelling up in the north of England. And the reason it's really important for research-intensive universities is that we're really important for our places and we have values which align to delivering benefit for the region as a whole. And we really want to be part of a connected system which accelerates economic growth, supports the creation of new jobs in what will be one of the fastest growing sectors of the global economy over the next 10 years. Will provide training and skills and jobs for the region and, as I say, drive the recovery from the pandemic. What we know is, of course, that the economic impact of COVID has really exacerbated the economic challenges of left behind communities, low skill and low productivity jobs in the north, and the climate crisis puts at risk potentially some jobs where there's a higher level of carbon intensive businesses than the UK average. The opportunity there is that we already have 35% of jobs in the low carbon goods and services sector, 50% of England's renewable energy and strength in green technologies. And so this really is the best place in the UK, in the Northern Powerhouse, to lead a green economic transition. So Net Zero North is their overall initiative. We're seeking a £300 million investment by government, which would upskill the northern workforce, providing 16,000 student years of net zero training by a skills alliance of further education, higher education and industry. We'd also increase the productivity of the region by creating and securing jobs in these fast growing sectors and contribute a significant proportion of the reduction in carbon emissions required to hit the net zero targets. Now, as you said, we have skills is a significant part of this programme, and we want to really create new training opportunities within further education, higher education and colleges, working with employers to reskill and upskill workers in all areas of the north. So that's really important. We've got this concept of a skills escalator, which would take people from skill levels 3 right through to 8. So that's kind of leaving formal compulsory education at age 18 right through to doctoral level, with potentially skills hubs in Teesside and also one in the northwest near to Morecambe. And the two innovation strands that we're looking at are the sustainable hydrogen economy and grow smarter. Now, the sustainable hydrogen economy, and I'm glad that Andy's probably going to follow on from me on this, builds on the prime capability of energy as a capability of the North, due to our expertise around generation, storage, low carbon technologies and processes, especially in nuclear and offshore wind. And by bringing together expertise across the region, we can really drive initially hydrogen take up through blue hydrogen in the first instance, but then moving on to green hydrogen. And this would really position the North as a global leader in the generation, storage and usage of green hydrogen. And that's a sector, again, which is expected to create tens of thousands of jobs over the next 20 years. And the second theme is around grow smarter. This is around how we make best use of our land. How do we make choices about what to grow, what to build, for a more sustainable future? So that can be using our natural assets to sequester carbon, but it's also about using those as climate adaptation and remediation. It's about more regenerative agricultural systems, and it's about thinking about whether we can use vertical farming technologies to increase the range of opportunities for growing food and other crops, to be honest, and where can we support our land in creating more biodiversity for the environment. So they're the innovation strands, and it's really important. This is such an important problem for the world that the research intensive universities want to get in there, want to get new knowledge out, want to get innovation and businesses working together to create these opportunities to make a difference in bringing down carbon emissions and creating a stronger, more prosperous economy for the whole of the north of England.
Thanks so much, Annette. That's fantastic and really appreciate it. I was going to come next to you, Andy Storer, about particularly the role of SMRs. So people may not be aware that obviously small modular reactors is very much part of the government's thinking around the ways we meet the energy challenge and the decarbonisation challenges in this country. Many assets, obviously, like Sheffield Forge Masters in South Yorkshire, so many other parts of the supply chain, and assets for sorts of projects, particularly the manufacturing supply chain, is here in the north. You've done a lot in this space. Obviously, you work with a number of the big international and domestic consortiums and players in this world. What do you think is the possibility of particularly for the north of England, not just of the deployment of this technology, but the building of these in terms of the manufacturing component? What do you think that would mean in terms of jobs and growth? Might come on to fusion later, but let's start with SMRs and maybe get to fusion a bit later.
Thanks, Henry. Well, maybe I'll just start a bit further back, just to set the scene for nuclear. Today we've got 15 reactors, nuclear reactors, producing about 8 gigawatts of electricity today for Britain. That's about 20% of our electricity needs and 40% of our clean energy, just to have it in perspective. By 2030, all but one of those reactors will be shut down. So in the next 9 years, all but one will be shut down, just to give a perspective. So just to get back that electricity, that clean energy, we need to produce 8 gigawatts of new nuclear. Hinkley Point today, which I'm sure everybody that's listening will have heard about or read about, for a decade now has been stop, start, pause and continue now at a good pace. That's 3.2 gigawatts. Just to put perspective, that's 3.2 gigawatts. That infrastructure project is about the size of the Olympic Parks, just that one project. Sorry, the Olympic Games. So it's, to give a comparison, I've got a meeting with the Energy Minister actually this afternoon to talk about 40 by 50. So we believe that 40 gigawatts is by 50 for nuclear, for new nuclear. So that replaces what we've got to then goes beyond in partnership with other forms of renewable clean energy. So if where does SMR fit into that? The UK consortium, of which we're a member, we plan to have the first pilot SMR by 2030. That's a real challenge in the next 9 years, but we can do that with the team that we've got. We plan then to have hopefully as many 16 or 30. It's a 470 megawatt power plant, 82, 15 gigawatts. So you can see that we start to eat into the 40 gigawatts. Huge amount of infrastructure and manufacturing development required from large reactors, which have their place, but small and then advanced. We are partnered with all the advanced modular reactors, of which there are 4 currently being pursued by government. And as you said, Henri, we are also partnered with fusion. Fusion will not really have an effect by 2050 in a large way. There might be a couple of gigawatts towards the back end of the 40s, but in reality, to keep the lights on, to contribute to clean energy, we're looking at large and small and advanced reactor technologies. Just to give a perspective for manufacturing, one UK SMR has about 200,000 tons of steel. 200,000 tons of steel for one UK SMR. If we had 32 UK SMRs, that's 15 gigawatts. So you can see the scale of potential on this program if the government decide to press the button and go for it. We believe they've got to go for it. Nuclear's got to play that role. In fact, nuclear is now part of the government strategy in the Energy White Paper, and Kwasi Kwarteng is continuing to take questions today on nuclear. So, and then in terms of the north, in your point, Henri, well, sorry to those people south of Midlands, but there's not a lot of metal production there, and nor large manufacturing. These are large infrastructure projects. So a lot of the sites are across the north. It's no surprise. It was no surprise to me, even though it was hard work, to get the UK AEA test facility in Rotherham because they need to move out of Oxford. They do the science in Oxford, but the practical transformation of those thoughts and ideas into reality, they happen north of Watford, right? So we've got to really start to step up. That's a challenge for us all. You know, it's okay us banging the drum and saying we want jobs, we want manufacturing projects. We've got to be ready and we've got to be prepared to accept them. And so our job, my job and my team's job is getting companies ready. So Fit for Nuclear, we're working with about 3,000 companies now across the north, mainly across the north, mainly SMEs. And we need to get them ready to receive the scale of these contracts. Just this morning, I've been in a conversation with Rolls-Royce talking about some very significant numbers that would be released as soon as government press go on a £500 million next phase. There'll be significant contracts let across the north. The UK fusion team are ready to go on the next developments for their spherical tokamak siting. That will mean huge potential across those sites, those regions. And I know that the sites are in northern regions. So I think there's huge potential. My challenge to everybody listening is we've got to start to form a readiness program, a roadmap, and I'm going to put my team in the mix for coordinating that. That's probably enough for now, Henri, given the time, but lots of excitement across nuclear and lots of spin-offs to other adjacent sectors like defence submarines. And I'm working with Sheffield Forge Masters to ensure that they are right in the thick of the conversations, and they are.
Great, Andy. So kind of you to make the time as well. And finally, I was going to ask Andy Koss, who was a founder, board member at Northern Powerhouse Partnership in one of his previous roles, has an extensive career here in the region, which started in Bradford, like all good careers in the north, following his departure from banking and financial services. But Andy is a great example of someone who has genuinely walked the walk in terms of the Yorkshire business community and understands, having been involved in many early projects, including clean coal, which we all hoped originally with carbon capture might be a great opportunity, but the then Conservative government didn't see it quite the same way. So I think now we've probably won the argument on carbon capture, admittedly a few years later, but it's good eventually to always win these debates, but they're not easy ones to have. And some ideas are often not necessarily adopted by government when they might first be needed and suggested. So it's great for you to be here, Andy. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of what you're now doing at Semb at the very centre of one of the most interesting places in the UK in terms of industrial policy, a real focus for the government, clearly, on your site and your neighbours at Tees Works. And Semb with some incredibly important tenants like SABIC, are a vital part of the UK chemicals industry, as well as being at the heart of the energy transition. And really glad, Andy, you can be with us, and really be great to get your reflections on what the opportunities might be around bringing your old patch of the Humber and the Tees together when it comes to decarbonisation, because obviously the government's thinking more along those lines, and we need to think of Yorkshire as being old Yorkshire, because of course the Tees was always in Yorkshire famously, and the now Metro Mayor of the Tees Valley famously tried to leave the Tees Valley before it was created. So he wanted to take yarn out of Stockton and bring it back to Yorkshire. Ironic, of course, now that he's such a great champion for his part of the world, and he laughs about it now. But metaphorically as well as intellectually and industrially, how much is the Tees part of Yorkshire when it comes to the decarbonisation debate? And obviously the Humber and the Tees might technically have different geographic designations and different cultural histories, but intellectually, economically, are those the two things that Yorkshire really brings to the energy debate? Because in my heart of hearts, I think they're the bit of Yorkshire, the top and the end, if that makes sense, that really make the rest of Yorkshire have something special to offer because of the potential relationship between the two. But maybe I'm being all gooey-eyed, Andy, but I think it's certainly something, if anyone understands what might be possible, it's probably you.
Yeah, well, no, well, thank you for that introduction, Henri. No, I mean, I think we've been on a journey, certainly with carbon capture and storage, and I think the people that have been involved in it for many years, it's almost the energy technology that won't die, it keeps coming back, and I do think that's because it really does have a role to play in the transition to net zero. And I think there's increasing recognition by government. And if we go back to the Committee on Climate Change, who published the report in May 2019, they actually said in that report, carbon capture and storage is essential if we are going to hit net zero in 2050. And I think following on from the points that Andy and Annette have made, I mean, when I was on Northern Powerhouse Partnership, we did say that one of the key core capabilities of Yorkshire and the North as a whole was in energy provision. And I remember going on a tour with you where we went from nuclear in the northwest and then offshore wind in the east, and then all the gas, coal and other stations in between that really sort of demonstrated the heritage and the amount of power that was, I'm just going to get the lights on here, the power that was being generated that for the whole of the UK. I mean, the North is a massive exporter of power. And I think your point around, I don't think you are being gooey-eyed, because what's really interesting now about the carbon capture and storage debate was, I think, the White Rose project, which you referred to, that I worked on. There were lots of learnings that came out of that. And although I think there was huge disappointment that it didn't go ahead, there was a lot of learnings. There was a task force that Lord Oxburgh ran after that to say, right, how do we capture the learnings from this? And one of the key things that came out of it was the scale and the economic benefits of putting together clusters. If you can bring together power projects, industrial decarbonisation, potentially hydrogen, blue hydrogen, around common infrastructure, that was going to drive cost savings for consumers as we transition to net zero. And that has been adopted by government. And what we saw, I mean, as soon as PERDA was over on the sort of 6th, 7th of May, we saw the government actually launch its, or it kicked off the approach to carbon capture and storage, which is now that they want to get those first clusters on. And the ambition is incredible. 2 clusters up and running by the mid-2020s, 2 more by 2030, capturing 10 million tonnes of CO2 through these clusters also by 2030. So the ambition is there. And what's really, really great to see is the Humber region, probably the biggest emitter in the UK today. and also Teesside. So as you say, at opposite ends of the Yorkshire region, are actually looking to combine under the name of the Northern Endurance Partnership to access the same carbon offshore storage facility in the North Sea. And that's great, because if we pull those two together, given the North's industrial heritage, given its capacity to put new power plants and repurpose what we have today and use all the skills that Annette was talking about, we can combine that, use a common cluster, an offsite storage facility, and hopefully that can drive significant savings for the UK and create the jobs and skills that we need to go forward. And the government also are looking at, they really want to see power projects. I think power with CCUS has always been probably the easiest, and certainly from a regulatory and contractual framework has been there for some time, the easiest to implement. But industrial decarbonisation is something we're looking at. And again, here at Teesside, as you mentioned, SABIC, Anglo-American, ENSUS, Huntsman, industry wants to start decarbonising, but it's probably one of the more tricky challenges to overcome. But now mechanisms are being put in place to facilitate that. And then hydrogen, which has so many uses, whether it's in transport, whether it's in heating, whether it's industrial processes, even putting it through a power turbine to generate power as well. All of those applications, and even extending that to ammonia, if we look at sort of people like CF Fertilizers, again, being able to do that and capture the carbon, hopefully that can unlock a real potential and jobs and a huge transformation. Teesside today is the biggest generator and user of hydrogen in the UK. It's not huge. That could be scaled up significantly. But BP have announced they want to look at a facility here to sit close to their net zero Teesside project. So again, Teesside, I think, sits right at the heart of the low carbon economy. I think there are very strong links into the rest of Yorkshire. And as you say, very much part of the levelling up agenda that is so key to the government's ambition as well.
Thanks, Andy. And just a quick reminder to everyone in the session that you can ask questions in the Q&A if you want to. But I, to be honest, have quite a few questions already have come to mind from those. So I'll bring some of those in, and then as people ask questions, we'll draw those in as well. So I think one of the reflections I think that came to me was around kind of what the synergies between these technologies are. Does that make sense? Because clearly nuclear, Andy, has a big link to the hydrogen economy. And I suppose one of my kind of questions, both to you and Annette, really, was going to be about, to what extent do we think that that kind of the nuclear sector is going to play a big part in that? And from an R&D perspective, Annette, what do you see as the connection? But also, Andy, from a kind of electricity,
yeah, should I go first? I mean, the link with nuclear and hydrogen is absolutely clear, I think, now. It wasn't for quite a while, but it's definitely there now. The advanced modular reactors that I mentioned are micro size. They're for local heating systems, but also for hydrogen heat for hydrogen production. Of course, Rolls-Royce's interest in the SMR, of course, starts and continued with synthetic fuels. So, you know, the hydrogen production into synthetic fuels. So there's lots of synergy and links with hydrogen, and that's how we've helped to make a better case to government for new nuclear and advanced technologies. The R&D required, you know, shouldn't be underestimated. The R&D required for advanced manufacturing methods. I talk about nuclear in clean energy, but if we look at the production of materials and the manufacturing process, forming, forging, machining, etc., there's lots of better ways now to produce products. So we need to introduce that in terms of clean manufacturing as well, which is what, as part of the catapult, that's what we're doing. And we've produced a 2/3 size vessel for a nuclear product in Sheffield, in Rotherham, our facility. And we can take almost a ton of carbon out of the manufacturing process just by using different methods. Of course, we've got to get that introduced into the regulatory regime, but it just shows what would be possible. But absolutely, nuclear is, we think, fundamentally part of the hydrogen economy, production, and cogeneration is now something that we're working with the Royal Society on, how we can introduce the more aspects of cogeneration, especially that I'll show up in a second. But if we look at nuclear or power stations today, and you see the whether it's cooling towers or what, there's a lot of infrastructure and effort goes into cooling down hot systems. If we capture that heat, I think it's 60% goes up into atmosphere of the heat. Capture that, you could heat a local town with that heat, So we're not making the best use of the power plants that we have as well. So this hydrogen is also just using a lot of the waste heat in a different way, which we're looking at, but it requires the next generation of technology to come through. That's all part of the UK SMR plan and the advanced reactor plans as well.
I'm going to come to Annette just in a second, actually, on the question I was going to ask. But we've had something that's come in from David Carr related to the design and construction needs, which I was going to bring you in on. So David asked, sort of, what are the concerns that the construction industry will overheat, not be able to deliver for all the design and construction work? Now, that's a natural SMR question, Andy Storer, because of course we know that kind of the costs of constructing big build nuclear is probably what has killed big build nuclear in the UK, because it obviously puts the price up. Without me answering the question for you, what would you say the benefits of SMR are in terms of our capacity in the construction sector?
Well, you've just answered it. I mean, if we look at the construction, we have to look at all infrastructure projects. We recognise that HS2 and other large infrastructure construction programs are going on, so the demand for that skill is going to increase. But you're right, the biggest cost influences to large nuclear are the way that the projects are financed, and then of course the huge amount of on-site requirement for construction. So the SMR, the advanced reactors, take that away and you build them in, and you've got a much smaller and predictable construction method. Doesn't take away the fact, though, if the point also relates to the amount of construction needs going forwards, we're going to need many more people that can pour concrete, the rebar for the concrete, huge industry to be had. And as I said, if you take one project like Hinkley, and you can understand what it would be. We need almost in parallel with the other infrastructure projects going on. So we're going to need a lot of planning, a lot of demand forecasting, and lots of skills to be brought through, which I'm sure we could talk all day about the skills agenda. But we've definitely got to make sure we're planning for success.
Just to come back, Annette, to what we were talking about before around the link between kind of nuclear and hydrogen. What do you see as the I suppose, the potential opportunity, right? Because clearly places like West Cumbria have a big problem, which is that the electricity distribution from remote places where nuclear technology might be kind of quite popular is not always the cheapest. So the sort of story of Newtown and what went wrong with West Cumbria wasn't just that the UK government couldn't provide a compelling certainty and structure for the industry in the UK, which was also the case, right? That was a bigger problem. But there was an engineering problem, which was you had to get the electricity to the rest of the northwest because there wasn't enough capacity, and the cost of doing that and avoiding the Lake District and doing it in such a way that wasn't ecologically damaging was quite a barrier actually to getting the price down of that project. Do you see the geographic opportunities of hydrogen, particularly, and what that could do in terms of sparking new industry clusters? So I think from an R&D perspective, clearly there's a big link between the hydrogen economy and the nuclear sector. And to what extent do you think some of those questions are ones we can answer now, or do you think it's going to take longer for us to be able to give the answers that we'll need to come to commercial propositions that can be deliverable?
Gosh, Henry, I think there's about 10 questions in that question. So to try and pick some of it off. and certainly in the short to medium term, the role of nuclear and hydrogen are inextricably interlinked. The generation of hydrogen using nuclear power is going to be crucial for growing the market, growing the supply of hydrogen and growing that market for hydrogen. In the longer term, I think the aspiration would be to move to low carbon derived green hydrogen. I think that doesn't negate the need for nuclear as part of the energy mix as we go to an increasingly electrified form of power delivery, particularly I feel personally for residential, because the infrastructure is there and people understand it. Adoption is likely to be easier with those kinds of technologies into the home. So I think that would be my first point. I think my second point would be that solving hydrogen storage and distribution at scale, which speaks to your point about the geography, is a key research and innovation need, and something that would form part of the Net Zero North programme, along with the other thing, which is removing barriers to using hydrogen. And that geographical aspect is there again. Turning to a point about clusters are, in terms of economic development, it's been well established now that how important clusters are. And just to kind of reiterate some of the reasons why clusters are important, you can share development costs, you have shorter supply chains, you have from the employer's perspective, you have a density of skills, of a skilled workforce that you can plug into. From an employee perspective, you have a density of employers, so it makes it more attractive to workers to move into a cluster, because they have more confidence of the long-term kind of security of employment, whether that's with different companies. It makes that, all of that makes it more attractive for inward investment, and there's opportunities for kind of risk sharing. If you think of research and innovations of risk, there's opportunities for risk sharing. So I think all of that is absolutely crucial, and that's where the partnership of businesses, universities, further education, government, and the other agencies within the sectors become important. And partnerships. There's been a recent IBM report on what leading CEOs feel is important going forward in the 21st century, and partnerships are absolutely essential for those outperforming businesses. They are really looking to drive their business by sharing risk and benefiting from the diversity that the richness of those collaborations could bring. And I just at this point give a quick plug for, if there's people watching this that are interested in sustainable construction. We had a sustainable construction webinar as part of our Net Zero North series, and you can find that on our website. And there's some really fascinating insights there from a guy called Brad Pitt, who leads for the mayor of Boston in the US, or on issues around retrofitting homes and construction, and some of the issues there. So I'll just leave that one out there for people that are interested to pick up.
Turn now back to you, Andy, just to maybe reflect a little bit on the opportunities you see in terms of kind of bringing industry back to the north, right? And you alluded to it earlier. But to what extent do you think that our ability to generate decarbonised electricity might undermine some of our historical problems with kind of having to trade off having a manufacturing base with having a green economy? Does that make sense? To what extent can we successfully decarbonise our industrial base, would you say? And how are we doing right in that direction? Are we doing enough to help the people that are your tenants, right, to be able to invest in the UK? Because clearly you are home to a number of energy intensive businesses, so I suppose you understand better than most what would really help them to be able to be good green corporate citizens, right, whilst also being able to really genuinely be able to compete internationally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think then. I think historically there's been this, or there's been a feeling there's a trade-off between, you know, manufacturing and building up that side of the UK economy, and then the green economy, and you can't do both. And I think there's a growing recognition that they're very much aligned and one and the same. And I think the focus around net zero has really driven that. And businesses, I mean, they're under pressure from governments, they're under pressure from their shareholders, from other stakeholders. When I talk to a number of the customers that we have here, and I've been in this business for 9 months, the first thing people wanted to talk to me about was decarbonisation. What can you do, Semb, to decarbonise the utilities you provide? And yes, of course, they would like to see that happening at lower cost. But they also recognise that, I mean, if we look at the price of carbon, I mean, we're now trading. I mean, the UK scheme started trading today, and we're talking about £50-60 a tonne of carbon. I mean, that is material. And so I think the fact that carbon now has a really, I mean, a credible, significant price is driving changes in behaviour. And I think also the government recognise as well that we want to retain manufacturing, we need to do it in a green way. And they're seeing that if we provide that long-term investment certainty, which in our sort of industry is so important, and with long lead times and long asset lives, it can really make a difference. If we look at the offshore wind sector as a great example, the government will say we gave real guidance and clarity there for the long term. We had these auctions. The first auction for offshore wind cleared at or the first contracts were signed at £150 a megawatt hour. They're now being signed. The last round was about £40. So we've seen, that's 25%. And those cost savings have been driven out right the way across the supply chain. So I think there is a role. I think the government do have something to play, it's a very significant role here. They need to provide that certainty. And some of the policy stop-starts that we've seen are not great. But I think now if they're providing that clarity and they're starting to do that and roll out the mechanisms that will support industrial decarbonisation, I think that's what's going to really drive the changes. But they need to put, great ambition, and we've seen a lot there. I think as with all things, they need to start putting some genuine sort of money behind it and getting their checkbook out. And I think for these first projects that do need more support, of course, run your competitive auctions in the future. Let's take the learnings and drive the costs of decarbonisation down. But they do need to support, right the way back from the R&D through to these first of a kind projects, they need that support. And then the learnings and the cost reductions will come. So I think there shouldn't be a trade-off between manufacturing and decarbonisation. The other point just to make as well is, and I'm seeing it here because we're part of a free port zone, is the UK is very much saying now, look, we are open for business as the UK. We've done the dreaded B word is out the way, which was really hampering investment, I would say, particularly in this neck of the woods. But now that we're through that, the government is really trying to say we're open for business. We're trying to incentivise inward investment. There's a lot going on there. And I think that can also stimulate the growth that we're talking about.
Great, thank you. I think we're kind of coming to last reflections, right? And it's been a great discussion. So thank you so much for giving up your time and for joining us today. I was going to go to you, Andy Storer, next, just because I'll probably then go to Annette and to Andy last to just come up with some last reflections. If you had to sort of champion something in the north, to give it a bit of theme, an opportunity that isn't nuclear, that makes sense, that you thought would be game-changing for the north of England, outside of your day-to-day work, and something that would have a big benefit in Yorkshire that hasn't been exploited yet, what would be the industrial or commercial opportunity around the decarbonisation journey the north should embrace? Assume nuclear has already been accepted, right? What would be the next one that you would want to champion, or you could see a case for, where, from your perspective, what you've done, you think perhaps there hasn't been enough effort by government, by industrial partners to make enough progress?
That's a toughie because I'm a special narrow nuclear sector. But I think for me, I'm very generation of manufacturers, and I just feel that we're not doing enough to excite them from a young age, and the diverse portfolio of workforce that we need going forward. The world's different, and so I do a lot more, and a lot more than just sprinkle, into a team. We need to start back at first principles, how we teach people, and I think the North's got a role. Be a bit old-fashioned because the North is a manufacturing centre of Britain, and that's what will drive the economy in the longer term. So let's take care of the people that we expect to pick the baton up and go forward. They're the assets ultimately. You can buy machines, you can buy welding equipment, etc. But the people are what are important, and I feel quite passionate about that. So it's probably not what you were expecting. I don't know, but that's what I would like to see us invest time and effort in. And just while I've got the last second of my time, cost reduction, we have done a hell of a lot of work in nuclear, and it is comparable to other energy sources now. And I'm sure as we get the next volumes of reactors come through, they will be much more affordable than people expect. But anyway, I'll leave it there. But skills is a thing for me for the future, young people.
Thanks, Andy. And I think you mentioned skills earlier, and I think it's a key underpinner, isn't it, of the energy transition that people don't realise, is that you can have all the big industrial policy you want, but it has to be based on a workforce who can deliver it. And it's been one of the key barriers, hasn't it, with domestic supply chain. It isn't just about the businesses having the aspiration, it's about whether they can get the skills and talent to be able to scale up, particularly if people don't give them the notice, right, and the time scales to be able to find the people. And that's one of the reasons we often do lose supply chain opportunities, is because not having the skills pipeline. So I completely agree. And then my sort of slightly curveball question to you, and we haven't got long, so I'll make it a quick one, unlike the last one, which I realised was a bit essay-like. Why should government fund Net Zero North? Does that make sense? Why should they invest their money now? Does that make sense? When there's lots of things the government could do to help decarbonisation. Why is R&D a no regrets option? Does that make sense at this point in the cycle, this point in the journey?
Yeah, I think research innovation is like the no regrets option, because all of these capital infrastructure projects that they are funding now, there are still challenges that are going to be encompassed, that are not known but are going to be met on the way, or else there are known challenges which still need to be overcome in order to really optimise those investments. And so creating the knowledge and the innovation to get all of these investments working properly, I think is absolutely essential, as well as to come up with new ideas that haven't been thought of yet, which might come on stream more towards the 2040, 2050 part of hitting net zero by 2050. But those are some really tricky challenges. I mean, we know some of the technologies that are going to get us there now, and they need adopting and rolling out at pace, at scale. But the universities can really help with that really last bit, which is going to get us down to net zero by 2050. And so £300 million investment to help optimise and unlock the billions that are already going in, I think is an absolute bargain for the government, and something that they really should be seriously investing in.
So I'm going to give the last word to you, Andy, and obviously that is entirely because you are actually sat in the north. Now I'm going to break a confidence that Andy might be in Derby, a place I do love dearly, but it is unfortunately for the people of Derby in the Midlands. But it is the part of the Midlands nearest to the north, which it has in its favour, of course. Annette is in Swindon, home to my great friends at UKRI, who I love dearly and are doing so much to stimulate the north through all their investment in our world-class universities and many of our scale-ups and startups. But you, Andy, are in the north. So
in the north of the north, yeah.
In the north of the north. Well, I mean, I have friends, right?
Well, yeah, well, north
starts at Durham. So, I mean,
right.
there is the northeast is a place where people make a very unusual definition of this question. So, my last kind of reflection to you is going to be, obviously, who's really the king of the north? Is it Andy Burnham or is it Ben Houchen? That's my question to you, Andy. If this government is so serious about energy policy, is it going to really back Ben's ambition, do you think, and the ambition of the businesses on Teesside for the place?
Well,
do you see it coming?
I've got to say Ben Houchen, because I'm much, we've got a lot in common, and we're sitting tomorrow on the first Freeport board, so I'm going to say Ben Houchen. But what I think is, I think what's interesting about the government's position, I mean, who would have thought we would have a conservative interventionist government? And Ben Houchen seems to have really sort of espoused that with the Tees Valley Airport. He's got big ambitions to regenerate and take into public ownership, a lot more of the area here. And that seems to have really resonated with the electorate. And if you look at, I mean, my take on things like the Hartlepool by-election, Ben Houchen had a huge role to play in that, because people can see that he's delivering projects and there are jobs, being created. And that, I think, is, again, back to the, I suppose what we're talking about. This is where the government shouldn't be shy in absolutely. They shouldn't crowd out the private sector. They need to enhance and bring that money forward. And actually, by sponsoring the right projects and looking at net zero and really putting their heft behind it, I mean, it's worked very well for Ben Houchen, and hopefully that can be a model that can be deployed elsewhere in the UK, and seems to be, as I say, resonating with the electorate. So for me, I mean, the mayors seem to be, the devolved administration or the devolved power is working very well for Andy Burnham as well. But I think Ben is certainly flavour of the month in terms of where this government are looking to take things in the future.
Well, thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot, Andy, but no, I realise. I mean, the free political analysis is always welcome. I think I'll be out of a job, is my fear, if you ever finish at Semb, because you're much better than I am. So it's great to have had three friends today. As I'll admit, I know all of you individually, and you're great sports for agreeing to do this. I'm sure in the future we'll be able to do it face to face, but that's all we've got time for today. So thank you very much for those of you who joined us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Henri.